Hey, this video features some blood and old school horror special effects, and so it isn't suited for younger audiences. Also, I do recommend this film, so please watch it before I spoil it for you. I'll put a link in the description. Okay, bye. Trains have appeared in many films throughout the years as everything from the setting of the story to being part of a greater action set piece. As cool as these scenes are, not all of these engines are true to real life, and that gets on my nerves. So today, we're going to take a look at everything wrong with the trains in... Before we look at the trains, let's first look at the context. In 1906, Christopher Lee and a few friends find the frozen body of an ape man in Manchuria. As a keen scientist, Lee has the creature put inside a really heavy-looking box and plans to take it back to England via the Trans-Siberian Express to study it. At the station, Dracula bumps into his old mate Dr. Van Helsing, and the two have some friendly rival back and forth while Lee threatens the station master. Meanwhile, this dapper thief who looks like he's fresh out of a TikTok Chad edit tries to take a peek at Christopher Lee's box, and moments later is found dead and blinded. A crazy Russian monk says the contents of the box is unholy because he can't draw a cross on it, but Lee ignores the warnings and has it loaded onto the train anyway. While boarding, we're also introduced to some Polish nobility, a spy, the train's baggage man, an engineer, and a police inspector. Saruman requests that nobody messes with his now defrosting big mystery crate, and so Grand Moff Tarkin bribes the baggage man to open it up and take a look for him. Later that evening, the baggage man decides to have a peek, but it turns out the monkey man is a little bit more awake than expected, and is surprisingly adept at picking locks. Before he can do anything, the monster stares down the baggage man, blinding him and headaching him to death. With that, the ape is now free to cause some horror on this express.
Are you telling me that an ape that lived 2 million years ago got onto that crate, killed the baggage man and put him in there, then locked everything up neat and tidy, and got away? Yes.
After the monster headaches some more people to death, it turns out that the creature wipes the memories of its victims, leaving their brains about as smooth as that of the average Mr. Beast fan. It's eventually shot by the police inspector after fatally brain-rotting the spy lady, and the danger is over. For now. After examining the creature's eye and seeing literal pictures of dinosaurs and the Earth from space, Lee and friends theorize that the creature is an alien that fell to Earth millions of years ago, and that it stores its memories in its eyes. Not just that, but it also takes the memories of the creatures it kills, gaining their knowledge. The monk, upon seeing this, believes that the creature is actually Satan, the angel cast down from heaven, and so, despite being a holy man, decides to pledge his loyalties to the monster, who, it turns out, has transferred its mind into that of the police inspector. Why the monk does this, I don't know. Possibly because he's fed up with the abuse he gets from serving the Polish count, but mostly I think he just does it for shits and giggles. Thanks to the help of the monk and some goofy makeup, the creature starts taking the minds of more and more people, seemingly trying to find a way of building a rocket to get back home. With people still dying and the monster still at large, the train is stopped at the next station, and a bunch of Cossack soldiers get on board to deal with this murder problem once and for all. After some brutal interrogation, the policeman is found out, but before the killing blow is dealt, the monk lets the creature take control of his body. The monk then proceeds to easily brain rot the Cossacks to death before running off to harass the Polish count. Count Dooku tries to negotiate with the monster, to which the monster then raises all the people it's killed as zombies. In a bid to get to safety, Lee and the Countess flee to the baggage car with the rest of the passengers and uncouple it. Up ahead, a station is given orders to derail the express. I guess the idea is there can't be a murderer on a train if there is no train? The monk kills the driver and fireman and for some reason starts driving the train himself, and the express ends up running off a cliff. The baggage car comes to a stop and everyone is left understandably bamboozled by the series of events that have just unfolded, myself included. Honestly, it's a pretty fun story, and an interesting concept for a horror monster. Christopher Lee is always great on screen, and Peter Cushing has some entertaining one-liners. The stakes escalate naturally, and the monster feels like a genuine looming threat throughout the whole movie. I will admit though, it does get a little goofy at the end. The monster able to summon zombies out of nowhere and the train just flat out flying off a cliff feel tonally out of place in this The Thing-esque murder mystery. I guess it's a cult classic for a reason, but enough about the movie. Let's talk about... Shot in Spain, production of the film used a real locomotive and a model. The station scenes, which were shot in Delicias railway station, featured an RENFE 414F locomotive, while a model train was used for exterior shots of the train travelling throughout the rest of the film. Which specific 141F, I'm not sure. A good handful of 141Fs have been preserved, and so it could have been one of them. However, something to note is that at the time the film was shot, Spain was withdrawing steam locomotives from service, and so it's possible that some random 141F was just put to one side to be used as a prop before being scrapped. Interestingly, the model locomotive, despite its somewhat shoddy nature, was the entire reason the film got made in the first place. One of the film's producers had acquired the model from the production of Pancho Villa, which itself had acquired the prop second-hand from the production of Nicholas and Alexandra. The producer wanted to do something with the prop, and had a writer come up with a story using the train and several scripts the studio had cheaply acquired the rights to. The film was shot back-to-back with Pancho Villa, and the model was quickly modified and redecorated for Horror Express. And when I say model, I'm not talking some O-gauge Thomas the Tank prop. The locomotive and carriages were almost 2-foot gauge in scale, and likely rode on the same tracks used on the Pancho Villa set, albeit with more snow than sand. I don't know the exact scale, so please let me know in the comments, but the opening shot is filmed with someone standing beside the tracks, so this ought to give you some clue as to the size. Exact information is hard to find on the scale of the props and how much track was built, but given how cheap the production was, it's hard to imagine it was much. Sound wasn't recorded on set, and so actors had to redub their lines in post, and the studio they shot in was so small that they only had room for one carriage set at a time. Honestly though, despite everything, I think they did a pretty good job with what they had. But we're not here to praise them. We're here to nitpick some trains. Starting out, we get a few shots of the model in motion, and I don't want to get too picky right away, but the smoke coming out of that engine's funnel is coming out a bit too fast and only out the very front. I don't know what kind of draft that smoke box has, but it's clearly not good. Also, not a train inaccuracy, but it seems the cameraman here fumbled the camera a bit while getting this shot. It seems they forgot train spotting 101. Always use a tripod. In the station scenes, we get a good few shots of the 141F kitted out to look like a true Shanghai steam engine. I'll get it out of the way now and say that the 141Fs were built in 1952, 46 years after the film is set, so period accuracy is a little bit off. Also, it's a Spanish locomotive in Shanghai. I've got to ding it. And you know what? Let's just add another ding for the carriages too, just to be safe. As much as I harp on about period accuracy, it must be said that a 282 was a good choice to represent a Trans-Siberian train, as many locomotives used on the Trans-Siberian would have been 260s, 460s and 280s. 282 Mikado locomotives wouldn't really come into common use in Eastern Europe and Asia until around the 1930s, but given the budget of the film and what was available, something big with at least 6 medium-sized driving wheels would have been good enough. So I'd say the 141F, while not ideal, is a pretty good representation of what the Trans-Siberian would have been using at the time. The next time we see the train in motion, it's the model, and you'd hardly tell it was a different engine. Apart from the proportions being off, the boiler sitting lower in the frame than it should, the engine now having a Belpaire firebox, its valve gear changing, there's no substantial frame or internal valve gear, I'm fairly certain there's no brakes, the fact it's now a 280, and just overall how janky it looks up close. Despite how flimsy the model is, I do have to say it's much closer in appearance to an actual Trans-Siberian steam engine than the 141Fs. Because Russian railways were built to broad gauge, the boilers in the locomotives could be mounted slightly lower compared to standard gauge designs, and the cabs were also slightly lower as a result. Both of these things seem to be true of the model, but whether it was intentional or just happy coincidence will remain a mystery. Something that caught my eye was these gangway connectors. Seeing how passengers would carry all their essentials on them, these baggage cars would have just been goods vans which were coupled onto the train. Gangways were unnecessary as neither the guard nor passengers would need access to the vans while the train was in motion, and so why these vans have them is a mystery to me. Given that there isn't a gangway connector on the other side of the car when there should be if it was designed to be accessed from the carriage, I'm going to put this down as an inaccuracy. Another carriage inaccuracy I only just noticed while writing this script is there's no kitchen car. From what we do see of the 4 carriages, there's the private carriage at the front belonging to the Polish Count, the second one along is the dining and lounge car, and given the number of passengers, the other 2 must be the sleeper cars or the passengers' private quarters. This wouldn't be a big issue, but at one point we see the passengers enjoying a full restaurant service aboard the train with what looks to be hot, freshly cooked meals. Where's it all coming from? This baggage van at the front? I don't think so. Coming towards the end of the film, the monk axes the lights to get the drop on the Cossack troops. Somehow hitting the lights in one carriage turns them out in 3 at the same time. My concern, however, is what's coming out of that pipe he just cut. Most of the lights in the carriages are shown to be gaslit, so one stray spark and that whole room is going up in flames. Somehow, during all the zombie commotion, the monk manages to make it to the footplate of the locomotive and starts driving it himself. I'm not saying it'd be impossible to get into the cab of a still moving train in freezing cold winds, but Nigel Gresley was still years away from patenting the corridor tender, so... And now we arrive at the ending train crash. The setup for it is that the station ahead is told to stop the train in a dead-end siding that just ends at the edge of a cliff. Firstly, who builds tracks like that? You've got all this space and you put the siding right on the edge of a mountain? When planning the route, did the Tsar just walk in and say, "Oh, by the way, I want there to be a random junction that goes straight off a cliff. Come on, chop chop." I guess that was just Russian royalty for you. Secondly, there's no signal and the station staff make no attempt to try and flag the train to stop. The orders were to stop the train in the siding, so these guys just read that and decided, stuff it, let's watch it go off the cliff. I guess there was little to do to keep yourself entertained in those days, but still. Cushing and Lee pull up the gangway so they can uncouple the baggage car from the rest of the train. And while it's very difficult to uncouple a carriage that's connected to a train while it's still moving, especially one connected via buffer and chain, I'd be willing to say it's plausible enough that I'm not going to count it as an error. Besides, I wouldn't worry if I were them. The outside shot shows the van was already uncoupled anyway. Whoops. Finishing off, let's watch this train crash unfold. I appreciate them putting buffers at the end of the line, but again, do you not think they could have been a little further forward? Not, right on the edge of a cliff? As the engine goes over the buffers, the extra bit they added to the tender to make it look taller and enclose the cab comes off. Only the first baggage van is behind the engine as the rest of the train just disappears for some reason. Then in the very next shot, a single carriage appears. When the engine hits the floor, there's a big explosion, but given a steam locomotive is a great big high pressure boiler on wheels, it should be more of a sudden, violent eruption of steam as opposed to a fireball. Also, it bounces around pretty far for a machine that's meant to weigh over 100 tons. Pause at the right time and you can see inside the model's hollow boiler. None of the carriages are even connected to each other anymore and are somehow exploding on impact. The fire I accept, gaslit carriages are infamous for immediately combusting as soon as they derail, but they wouldn't just burst the second they touch the ground like that. And finally, the baggage van manages to stop just short of the cliff. Let's all be honest here, that van would have gone off the edge, but luckily Christopher Lee used his innate black magic connection to the unspoken one to help slow it down. And with that, the nightmare is over. The monster is destroyed, the passengers look on at the mess in awe and horror, and a surprisingly groovy song plays to take us to the credits. So that was Horror Express. I'm gonna be honest, I like this film. The monster is intriguing, the characters are interesting, Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing are always a delight to see on screen together, and the stakes escalate naturally as the film goes on. It does fumble the ending a little with the smooth-brain zombies and the bizarre excuse to drive the train off a cliff, but I don't care. Even when its shoestring budget shows, be it the odd editing or the goofy makeup, it kept me captivated right until the end, which is more than can be said for a lot of the other cheap Spanish horror films like this that came out in the 70s. Reading behind the scenes and finding out about how the budget affected production, and how Peter Cushing was still grieving the loss of his wife but kept filming regardless, has only made me like this movie more, and I totally understand why it's considered a cult classic. Due to botched licensing stuff, the film is in the public domain, and is available to watch on YouTube, so check it out. The trains are... yeah, they're not very accurate, are they? From period and geographical inaccuracies to a full-on strange-looking model, you'd think that a movie called Horror Express would invest a little more into the express side of things. It certainly doesn't care about pleasing the train spotters in the audience. And to those of you who commented on the Lone Ranger review that it's only a movie, Hollywood doesn't get everything accurate, suspension of disbelief, etc., I'm well aware. I know movie producers are too busy having terrible ideas to read locomotive operating manuals. I'm just having a bit of fun going over a movie, picking out errors most folks wouldn't catch, and explaining why they're wrong. Obviously, a hollow prop locomotive being pushed off a cliff isn't going to look realistic. I'm just scratching a mental itch by explaining what would really happen in that situation. Anyway, train realisticness I'd give a 4 out of 10. Sure, the prop is obviously fake, but it's not doing any insane Polar Express physics stuff, so it's hard to be mad about it. In case it's not already obvious, I highly recommend this movie, be you train enthusiast or horror connoisseur. Nothing mind-blowing, just B-movie fun with a scary monster, death, and a train going off a cliff. Unless you're Christopher Lee, in which case that's just a quiet Wednesday afternoon.